Welcome to the Bloomberg Technology Summit and our panel, Hyperdrive, the future of the automobile. I'm delighted to be joined by Zoox's co-founder and CTO, Jesse Levinson, also from Pony.ai, James Peng, who is the company's CEO, and from AutoX, Jewel Lee, who is the COO. And we have a lot to discuss, and I'm going to start with a big picture question, which is for you, Jewel. Why do we need to work towards a future where vehicles can drive themselves?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it brings so much value to the society. And first of all, I think it's going to boost the safety level of our transportation by a huge amount. And secondly, I think we're facing a global labor shortage. So we will have less and less people available to drive. And the automation of mobility is certainly one of the biggest things that we need to solve.
James, there seem to be two models here. One where we're working towards a world in which vehicles are passenger cars, right, that you own, but they drive themselves, so that while you're sitting in the vehicle, you can switch off for a little bit or check your emails. And then there's the other model, which is robo-taxis, fleets operated by a third party that you hail as if it were a ride-hailing service. Which model is Pony working on, and why?
Yeah, certainly, I think both models bring a great value to the society. It's going to be promised to be safer, more convenient to the passengers. Pony's focus traditionally has always been to robo-taxi, which is really we're developing a versatile and really safe virtual driver that should be able to handle all types of driving situations. So I think that brings the most value to the passengers.
Jesse, you're in a slight advantage because I've been in the Zoox autonomous vehicle. For the audience that aren't familiar, it's basically a shuttle with no steering wheel, no pedals, 4 passengers face inward to each other. But you're pursuing a model that's basically a one-stop shop, right? You build the vehicles yourselves, and then you operate them as part of a ride-hailing service, a consumer-facing service. Why do that one-stop shop model?
So our view is that for such a safety-critical integrated product, it's really helpful and important to have that under one roof. If you think about the iPhone, that was a very new form factor. You really needed to do the hardware and the software to pull something like that off. We think the same thing is true for robotaxis, but even more so because there's also the safety element. So we have to be able to certify that these vehicles from the hardware and the software are super safe to use. And we also want to create the best possible experience for our customers, which are riders and not drivers.
So I think everyone has the same question whenever you discuss autonomy, autonomous driving, autonomous vehicles, which is, where are we? What is the reality of today's technology? Jewel Lee, what is your progress report on autonomous driving?
It's been a great year from 2020, actually. We first got driverless in 2020, about April, and then we start scaling them up. Now we're covering about 65 square miles of driverless ODD. That's the size of the area where we can go driverless. So I think this is the progress, and it will continue to be the focus that we work on, is to scale. That's the word that we're focused on. We have already been driverless. I think all three of us, all 3 companies here, we have the California DMV driverless permits, right? So we've been there. That's the first step. The next step is to scale.
Well, on the next step, James, what are the technological challenges broadly the industry is trying to conquer here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in general, one of the biggest challenges for autonomous driving or for general AI is really how do we make the system to be general enough so that it can be as expert as a human being. In terms of autonomous driving, it's really how do we handle all types of driving situations and the weather conditions, you name it. So that's part of the reason where Pony started the open road testing in both China and the US. Actually, in China, we are testing in all 4 tier 1 cities. So we're trying to tackle the problem for generalized AI solution from the get-go. Then if really take the thermometer for what's the current status, I think for Pony and for the industry in general, the main focus is really one keyword: commercialization. Right? I think we spent the last 5 to 10 years really build great technology. Really, these days, it's about how do we mass produce and deploy a large fleet of autonomous driving vehicles, and how do we have the commercialization to make and push the fleet to be a benefit to the society and to everyone's mobility.
I certainly want to come on to commercialization. Jesse, before we do that, you know, for Bay Area residents, they'll be familiar with the Zoox test vehicles, right? The retrofitted Toyota Highlanders that you drive around. They have large, very visible sensor suites. And those are not the vehicles that you end up deploying in the future, right? Those are not your commercial vehicles. So what is it that you're testing? What are those test drives around cities? And you're also introducing those to Seattle for some wet weather testing, without being unkind to one of my favorite cities. You know, what do you gain from that exercise?
Sure. So we've been primarily testing our so-called level 3 fleet. So those are retrofitted regular cars with our sensors and computers and our software. And we've been testing those primarily in the San Francisco Bay Area, Las Vegas, and just recently have started expanding into Seattle as well. Seattle's exciting for us because it rains a lot there. We want to make sure that our sensor suite and our AI handle adverse weather really, really well and safely. It's also a great market for us, and there's some good engineering talent up there, so we're going to also be doing some engineering there as well. But those are not our product, as you pointed out. You're one of the few people who's actually seen the product that we're building. We did reveal that publicly just about a year ago now, and that's the product that we've been testing extensively on private and semi-private roads, including without a driver, and that's the vehicle that we're going to be actually developing for our customers, which are our passengers, in the coming years.
So James, you talked about commercialization and being able to deploy fleets of robo-taxis at scale. You are active in mainland China, as you said, but you also test in the Bay Area. What is the benefit of having activities in both jurisdictions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing I already mentioned is how do we make the AI algorithms to be as general as possible, and being able to test in all different type of traffic conditions and the traffic behaviors. It's an enormous benefit to make our virtual driver to be versatile. And in addition, in terms of commercialization, we have already obtained the commercial license in Beijing and being able to charge on our public-facing fleet. I think that's a solid step towards the commercialization, and having more cities to have our testing fleet is going to expedite that process.
And Julie, a similar question, but which market do you see being real first? And when I say real, you know, I share the frustrations of consumers that have heard so much about autonomous driving, but when will I be able to really open my phone, summon a real robo-taxi, and where will that happen first? In China or in the United States?
Both. I mean, you already have driverless vehicles in both countries, and we are doing it in both countries as well. I like the word real that you use. I like it a lot. I think one of the issue is that when people are talking about cities, we have been testing in 13 cities globally, historically. But we also realize the same issue, is that it's nice to have different variety of data. That's definitely helpful. But we need to make it real. And for people to really use it in their daily lives, the cars have to be first driverless. It have to be driverless. It's not the same if you have a safety driver there and call it commercialization. Two is you have to have a very large ODD. People need to be able to go anywhere they want. and I can go anywhere I want, to school, to home, to country. And third, to cover that large amount of ODD, you need lots of cars. So several hundreds of cars is not going to do it for a real service, for a city, for a metropolitan city like Shenzhen, Beijing, or Shanghai in China. So I think that's the three key factors that we need to cover when we talk about real.
Jesse, I think it's fair to say that Zoox has been a little more pragmatic than some of its peers in the Bay Area. You've been, I guess, more conservative in what your goals are in terms of timelines. But what is it going to take for you to commercialize the technology? Is it in your control, or are you at the will of regulators on that front?
So, in the United States, there aren't too many regulatory roadblocks to getting this technology out there. The United States has actually been pretty progressive. NHTSA came out in 2016 with the world's first guidelines for fully autonomous vehicles. And, in a pretty landmark decision, they said you can consider the AI to be a driver. And that was, 5-6 years ago now. Many states, the United States, have also come along with their regulations, and they've tried to pave the way. And so, frankly, what's really preventing the wide-scale deployment is, all of us here, we have a very high safety bar for this technology. We want to make sure that before we deploy these vehicles at scale on public roads, that they are meaningfully safer than human drivers. And so, the difference between saying, okay, in these situations it's really safe, but we still have these corner cases, versus we handle everything so well that we can deploy them at scale, that's really what we're working on right now. So, we showed our vehicle driving autonomously in downtown San Francisco. It has the functionality to do that. And in many ways, it's already safer than people. But we want to make sure that we have a comprehensive safety case as we deploy it at some scale. And that's exactly what we're working on right now.
James Peng, we've talked a lot about robo-taxis, essentially, vehicles that a passenger who needs a ride gets into and goes from point A to point B autonomously. But there are other use cases, delivery, trucking. Which use case, to your mind, is commercialized first? Which use case will we see most widespread?
We actually don't look in a way to see which one will be commercialized first, but we rather looking at which application going to have the most impact to our daily lives. And we certainly see the biggest, and when you're looking at the transportation or mobility as a pie, the two biggest slices are the transportation or the mobility for passengers and for goods. So that's what Pony is focused on. We are focusing on robotaxi and robotruck, because we think those two applications will have the biggest impact to us. And that's another way to why we try to make our virtual driver to be so general and so expert, so that we should be able to drive all different types of vehicles.
On that note, and kind of jumping on the back of Jesse's answer, Julie, who should decide that the technology is ready?
I think as of now, the company should be the first one to take the responsibility, right? And that's how the industry is doing this at this moment, because the company is the creator of the technology. We have the most knowledge of how safe and what the metrics are in terms of safety. So, and each company's methodology and technology are probably slightly different from each other. It's not the same. So we are the judge of that at this moment. But for example, we work with regulators and law enforcement very closely. In China, if you want to have a permit to be being driverless, for example, on the road, we have to pass tests that are set for us. It's very much similar to a human when they get their driver's license. We have to pass certain tests. There are hundreds of them, and we need to repeat each one 50 times. So the performance is certainly evaluated, and I think that's a very great beginning. It's certainly not the end. We will have more careful regulations on how safety is standardized, but I think it's definitely a great start.
I want to spend the second half of this panel thinking about the consumer a little bit. And Jesse, how do you convince the consumer that the technology is safe? How do you convince someone to get in one of your vehicles when the time comes for them to be deployed?
Yeah, there's a really multifaceted way to look at that. I don't think there's any one sentence you can tell everybody that's going to make them say, "Oh, that sounds great." It's a combination of educating them on kind of quantitative safety data, and I think we would all agree that you have to combine a lot of real-world driving and testing with even larger amounts of simulation, where you can test repeatedly and deterministically all kinds of dangerous and corner case situations on every version of your software. And so, part of what we do is we actually release videos explaining how we do that and showing some of the results. That's part of the story. And then part of it is, the vehicle itself has to be very, very safe. And so we put over 100 safety innovations in our ground-up vehicle, and we've actually created a vehicle and a passenger experience that's much safer than a regular car. Now, an area where we view things a little bit differently from some of the companies in our space is we do believe that a custom-built vehicle where you don't have the sort of disembodied steering wheel going like this, the interior of our vehicle feels much more like being, in a monorail or a train. It's a very safe feeling experience, and you don't feel like there's a missing driver. You just feel like, hey, this was never designed for a driver in the first place.
Julie, throughout the pandemic and in the context of autonomous driving, what have we learned about what the consumer wants?
Yeah, certainly. During the pandemic, I think we also had things that we purposely built for pandemic. For example, we do not ask people to use the touchpad anymore to talk to the vehicle. They would be able to do it on their own phone, or by scanning, or by voice, etc. So these kind of things are what the pandemic taught us. And secondly, I think after pandemic, it's a lot more welcome for people to hop in a robotaxi without any safety driver sitting there, versus always having someone there, or even sharing the ride. So I think it's getting more and more welcome, and people are starting to pay more attention to other applications of autonomous driving as well, such as robot delivery.
James, some of your biggest automotive partners are companies that sell cars to passengers, right? And I wondered if you could explain how their work with Pony and the goals that you're kind of working toward together fit in with their long-term strategy for producing vehicles, and how they engage with the consumer down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having a long history and the expertise in the hardware and in the vehicle manufacturing is important for the mass adoption of autonomous driving vehicles. And that's why we always consider the close collaboration with the big OEMs is a key success factor for Pony. We work with the big OEMs as really partners. We do co-development on the autonomous driving vehicles, because really it's the deep collaboration on the software and hardware that makes a total solution that can be safe and cost effective. So that's, I consider the co-development and preparation for large-scale deployment and large-scale manufacturing will be the focus for us for the next several years to really make, as you mentioned, the real adoption or real usage for the autonomous driving.
You've all been good industry colleagues, and this is a good panel, and it's sad that we're all remote and separated, but I want to get a little competitive, if that's okay, and ask you this, Jesse. There are lots of players in this space, right? Globally, concentrated in the Bay Area. Can all of them survive, and can all of them achieve the same goal?
I don't know that all of them will survive. That's unlikely. When you have a multi-trillion-dollar new industry like this one, you'll see lots of big companies and small companies try to build something great, and that's wonderful. That's exactly how you get innovation. unfortunately, not every company succeeds, but this is also not going to be a winner-takes-all market. It's just too big of a market. There is no historical example of a multi-trillion-dollar company that's completely dominated by just one company. Sorry, multi-trillion-dollar industry that's completely dominated by one company. So I'm sure we'll see several companies at least make a difference in the market. And, we have our approach. We're really excited about our approach, but that doesn't mean that every other approach is stupid, or there's only one way to deliver value to customers. And I think one thing we could all agree on is that it's really important that no matter what the approach is, that safety is that top priority, and that we don't compromise the safety of the people in the vehicle or the other road users. But the fact that there are several approaches and different types of vehicles and different business models, I think is a great thing for the industry and for consumers.
Julie, do we see different startups cooperate with one another? Do we see consolidation in this space?
Consolidation is not exactly the same thing as collaboration. Collaboration means we're still keeping independent companies, but what we see is that the bigger the large players get, and they intend to go more vertical. So I think it goes back to Jesse's comparison to the iPhone in the beginning. I totally agree, because this industry is so new. We don't have a very matured supply chain for tens of thousands of components, and because it's safety critical. So I think it's actually making more and more sense to go vertical, to consolidate and do more and more integrated within one company, to be able to say that we can guarantee safety here because we do an integrated approach. We do the software, hardware integrated approach to guarantee that our product has the highest standard or performance.
James, let me ask you this. How do you differentiate yourself in a large pool of companies pulling towards the same goal?
I think for us, the main focus is always on safety first, and we never compromise safety. I think the auto industry as an industry is built, survive, and thrive on safety. And we also focus on value creation. Right? That's the main focus of the companies. How do we create value for our partners, to the consumers? I think as long as we can continue to deliver values, then the Pony will continue to be successful.
I want to ask all three of you the same question as we approach the last couple of minutes. What is the tipping point for the real world deployment of commercial vehicles? Jesse, let's start with you.
I'm not sure there is one, to be honest. I think what you're going to see is, like Jewel was pointing out earlier, this stuff is already getting real, but it's real at a small scale today. And then next year it'll be a little bigger, and the year after a little bigger. And, in 10 years, we're going to wonder why people used to own 2 cars per family in the United States. That's going to seem ridiculous. So I don't think there's going to be one moment where a switch flips. I think it's just going to be, more and more and more. And eventually it's going to really transform the way people move around cities and save a lot of lives and make the planet cleaner. So I think we're all really excited about that.
Jewel?
I agree. It's going to be progressive. However, I think it's certainly going to have stages, though. So we talk about hundreds of robotaxis. We'll talk about thousands of them. Then we'll enter tens of thousands of them. It's not exactly linear per se or exponential. It's going to be in stages. I think we're going to enter the next stage in 2022, which is coming in maybe 15 or 20 days. We will see a larger volume of autonomous vehicles very soon. And that's going to be beyond the level, the order of magnitude, although it's not dramatic, but it's beyond the order of magnitude that we see today.
And finally, James.
Yeah, I think on the high level, there are 3 main factors, right? One is the product needs to be safe and cost effective. Second, there will be regulation that supports it. And the third is consumers want them. I think all 3 key factors is moving along actually at a quite faster speed. So I agree with Jesse. They're probably not going to be a watershed moment to say everything, the switch just flipped on. But as long as all three factors moving along, as long as a player in this industry continue to making progress and to create value for the consumers, and I think it will just happen.